Thank you very much for having me here. This is, I'm learning a lot. I'm not, you'll see there's no MD after my name. So this is, I'm absorbing like a sponge, hopefully. I'm going to start with a very odd question. Is there anyone in the audience who is here from the tobacco industry? Because I saw a name tag earlier that kind of made me think, okay, that's very good. So I'm going to talk about policy. I'm not going to talk specifically about screening, but it definitely enters into the tobacco endgame movement. As the slide says, tobacco remains the number one preventable cause of death by a long margin. It seems like in some cases that we've won the tobacco epidemic or we're winning it. That might be true in some places, but it's certainly not true globally. This year is the 20th anniversary of the coming into force of the WHO Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. And that started in 2000 and ended in 2003. And the idea was to help countries move forward on tobacco policy to stem the tide of the tobacco epidemic. And that has made a big difference. But when that negotiation started, the World Health Organization estimated that if we didn't do something drastic, 1 billion people will die from tobacco this century. And 20 years later, well, 25 years since that prediction, we're still on track to have a billion people be lost. So we do have to do something more drastic, and that's what tobacco endgame is about. So turning to the US, 20% of all the deaths in the US are still caused by tobacco. If you live in New York City or anywhere on the East or West Coast, that might seem like a lot, but there's places in this country where you can still smoke in every bar and restaurant, and the smoking prevalence rate is much higher. That's about 490,000 lives a year to something that's completely preventable, and we know exactly how to prevent it. So what we want to do with tobacco endgame is get rid of this word control. And I've been saying it so long, I'll say it several times here today, but control implies that there's some level of completely preventable death that we can live with. We don't want to control the tobacco epidemic anymore. We want to end it. A good example of that is the California Tobacco Control Program. It's one of the oldest in the country. It was started in 1989. 6 years ago, they started an endgame program, and I serve on their state advisory committee. 3 years ago, they realized that if they're going to do endgame, they got to get rid of the word control, and they changed the name of the entire program to the California Tobacco Prevention Program. This is happening bit by bit around the world as people realize that we have to be doing more. So briefly, what is endgame? There are several definitions, and I'll give a simple one in a moment on the next slide. But this is just a list of some of the things that it definitely has to have and things that it can't have. First, there's no one correct definition, but for people who play chess, it's important to realize that endgame is not checkmate. Endgame is the series of moves that get you to checkmate. There's not many jurisdictions in the world that are prepared to go straight to checkmate, although some have. Endgame also operationalizes our collective vision. The Action on Smoking and Health is the oldest anti-tobacco group in the country. We formed in 1967, soon after the 1964 Surgeon General's report. And in that entire time, our vision has been a world free from the death and disease from tobacco, not a world where we perpetually mitigate the death and disease from tobacco. So when I went to our board 10 years ago and asked them to make this change, I just said, well, you already say we're doing it, so why don't we just do it anyway? Endgame is not simply pressing harder on what we think of as demand-side interventions, the traditional interventions like smoke-free air, taxation, minimum age of purchase. Those things are still vital, and there are places in the world where that hasn't been done well enough yet, and we still need to do it. But endgame is not that. Endgame goes beyond that to the supply side. Endgame has a deadline or a due date. That date's going to change by jurisdiction because the context that governments are working in is different around the world. But it can't just be someday. All of us that work in, I'm going to say it, tobacco control, always think, oh yeah, of course someday we'll win this. But we can't just keep putting it over the horizon. We need to set a due date. Endgame also addresses tobacco as a systems issue, and rather than a behavioral issue. And by this I mean we're dealing with an industry-led epidemic, and we're dealing with governments who allow them to do it. No other industry gets to put a product on the market that is going to kill more than half their customers if they use it exactly as intended. If another industry introduced a product like that tomorrow, not only would the product be immediately taken from the shelves, those people would probably be prosecuted for putting that product on the market. It's a legacy product that we have to get rid of and take away that sort of free pass. Endgame also shifts the focus from policy of policy for demand to supply, and more importantly, from the victim, people who smoke, to the perpetrator. Nearly everyone who smokes as an adult got addicted as a child, and we owe it to them to help them. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. And we can't blame them. There's no shame in it. They're addicted to a product that was made intentionally as addictive as possible. So the simple definition, this is the Project Sunset definition of a tobacco endgame: to phase out the sale of commercial tobacco products. The word commercial is there because, of course, on this continent, there's a thousands of year history of Native Americans using tobacco for sacred use. This is not what we're talking about. No one ever died from smoking a peace pipe, right? It's the invention of the cigarette that started causing the tobacco epidemic. So there's two cardinal rules to Project Sunset. The first is that we target sales and not purchase, use, or possession. We call those PUP laws. As I said, we should be thinking of people who smoke as our clients, not our opponents. And so when a jurisdiction comes to us and asks for technical assistance, if they say they're also going to punish people for smoking, we walk away. We're not going to work with them. And then the second cardinal rule is that we have to assist tobacco users. And that includes helping them to quit, helping them not to start, early identification of tobacco-caused diseases. This is a $1.2 billion pool of people that we can help. So we came to this realization that Endgame was where we had to go once we switched from our normal way of doing business at ASH to adopting a human rights-based approach to tobacco control. We did that for several reasons, one of which is that there are mechanisms under human rights law that are stronger than the mechanisms we have under the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. But we also realized when we looked through that lens at the tobacco epidemic that the only possible conclusion was Endgame. If it's a violation of human rights to put these products on the market, and that's been shown, then of course governments have a duty to get rid of it. So the PROTECT is a three-pillared system. PROTECT applies to governments. Governments have a duty to protect their citizens' human rights, not just not to violate them, but to protect them. Respect applies to industries. Industries should uphold human rights laws. When they don't, and of course with the tobacco industry they're not, it bounces back to PROTECT. Governments can't just throw up their hands and say, well, what are we going to do? The tobacco industry is going to be the tobacco industry. They have a duty to stop them. And that's a big change in the way we think about policy. For decades, we've been going to governments hat in hand saying, can you do a little more about smoke-free air, or raise the tax a little bit? It would really help. They have a duty to do these things, and they have a duty to go further until they get these products off the market. So we set out to combine human rights and tobacco control, convince the tobacco control community that they ought to be using human rights as a weapon in their policymaking, and to convince the human rights community that tobacco is something they ought to care about. Our first big step was in 2018 at the World Conference on Tobacco or Health, where we drafted and managed to get past the Cape Town Declaration on Human Rights and a Tobacco-Free World. The very first paragraph of that declaration states that the only way that we can move forward permanently on tobacco control is to end the sale entirely. We followed that up with a global forum for human rights in a tobacco-free world in coordination with a colleague organization in Romania. That was held in 2019, and that's actually the president of Romania giving a speech at the beginning, and that's the presidential palace it was held in. The big stride forward here was it wasn't just public health people like it was at the World Conference. These were mostly human rights people that came. The Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights sent people. Most of the treaty secretariats for human rights treaties sent people, and it was a way that we launched the human rights community standing shoulder to shoulder with us to do something about this. And then a quick story about an example of the human rights world coming together. We were informed by a German colleague that the Danish Institute for Human Rights had entered into a contract with Philip Morris International. And it was a whitewashing scheme. PMI wanted them to look at a tiny bit of their supply chain and declare that they're upholding human rights in that tiny bit. So we reached out to them and said, you can't do that because Denmark is a party to the treaty. And the treaty says you can't enter into these voluntary agreements. So to their credit, they immediately sent the money back and canceled the contract. Then we asked them, could you put something on your website? Because almost every country has an institute like this. And to their eternal credit, they put a post on there that said, having looked at the human rights of Philip Morris International more broadly than that little supply chain, the only way that the tobacco industry can uphold its respect for human rights is to go out of business tomorrow. So some of the endgame policies, there have been a lot of very creative policy proposals put forward. Netherlands is doing some amazing stuff with banning sales in certain types of retailers. But I'm going to talk about the ones that have either been passed or are about to be passed. First is just the straight out sales ban. And few people know this, but there are 2 cities that have completely banned the sale of tobacco products. That's Manhattan Beach and Beverly Hills in California. Then there's the birth date-based sales phase out, nicotine-free generation, tobacco-free generation. You're going to hear a lot more about that in a moment. This is basically a sales ban with a grandfather clause. If this is all we can get politically, some pits can't do a sales ban. This is at least as a backstop. We can stop the hemorrhaging. We can stop the new generations from becoming addicted. There's also retailer phase outs. There are 4 places in the United States that have done this. They basically will never give a new retailer license. They will only renew the existing ones, and they won't transfer them. So we don't know when, but eventually there will be no more tobacco sales in that place. Oh my God, 5 seconds left, really. Do I have any more time at all? Okay, I'll go quick. There's nicotine reduction. Okay. 1 minute, okay. Nicotine reduction, reducing the nicotine in tobacco products to where it's not addictive. And then I include filter bans. One place in the world has actually banned the sale of cigarette filters, which it hasn't come into effect yet, but I think it's going to have a profound impact on prevalence. I won't even go over this map. There are currently 24 jurisdictions in the United States that have passed endgame laws, and the red dots are states that have had endgame bills. They'll all fail this year. New stuff always fails the first year, but they're going to come back and we'll get them. In the world, there's been a lot of movement very recently. I won't go over everything. The big yellow pins are South Australia and the United Kingdom, who both have tobacco-free generation laws that have already passed one House of Parliament, and our advocates there say they will pass the other. When the United Kingdom does it, that'll be 65 million people that live in a place with an endgame law. So we have some opportunities and challenges. You can read them. The biggest one is people don't know this is possible. When they know about it, they're wildly in favor. CDC did a study and found 57% of adults are in favor of an immediate ban on sales of tobacco products. We just need to get that message out there. Here's some endgame resources that you can go find if you're interested. I'm happy to talk to you. And okay,